Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:09 p.m. in, yes, and as you might have expected, a very grim, gloomy, dark, sunless, humorless Budapest, where you'd have to turn the light on in the middle of the afternoon. Um, and it's still only September. So we've got several more months of this misery to continue with. So, but anyway, that's that out of the way, my familiar routine out of the way. And welcome everybody who has joined me for the Tuesday night live stream. Welcome. Very happy to see you. And obviously, there are a few things to discuss. And the most uh, interesting thing is obviously the unveiling of the Trump peace plan for Gaza. So, if you recall, we discussed this with Peter during our live stream yesterday, and subsequently, Trump had his meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, and the, when we look at the plan, one has to say right away that there are obviously good things in it, but in terms of what the final outcome is, then you'd have to say that it has to count as a victory for Israel, because whatever the more positive aspects to the plan, and I think the chief most positive aspect to the plan is that basically Israel will not be permitted to ethnically cleanse Gaza, and that those who are the residents of Gaza who want to stay will be allowed to stay, and that even if they leave Gaza, they will be allowed to return, which is a historic first. Israel has never accepted any such principle that the moment you leave, you're allowed to return. Um, but in terms of Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, I think that you have to say this. It's very, very dubious whether there's that's really getting off the ground. And that's for the issue of Palestinian statehood. That also isn't really to be found anywhere. So if you just look at the plan which Trump unveiled yesterday, the 20 points, and you can see the firstly, the sort of as I said, the more positive aspects, and it was you obviously de-radicalize, blah blah, redevelop for the benefit of the people of Gaza. Then it says the Israeli forces will agree, if both sides agree to the proposal, the war will immediately end. Israeli forces will withdraw to the agreed upon line to prepare for a hostage release. So that's so basically it's just simply a withdrawal to a some kind of a line which is to be agreed upon, but it's not clear to who agreed upon among whom. And then during this time, all military operations will be suspended. Battle lines will remain frozen until conditions are met. Within 72 hours of Israel publicly accepting this agreement, all hostages alive and deceased will be returned. Now, that, of course, is very questionable because of when did that clock start with the 72 hours because Hamas is still considering the plan. So if if the 72 hours began yesterday evening, my time, middle of the afternoon on the east coast of the United States. So if the 72 hours, then already 24 hours have gone, and therefore Hamas has only 48 hours left to release the hostages. And then once all hostages are released, Israel will release 250 life sentence prisoners plus 1,700 Gazans who were detained after October the 7th. Once all hostages are returned, Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. Members of Hamas who wish to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage to receiving countries. Now, of course, that you have to take with a great deal of salt because even if they're allowed to leave the country, Israel will continue to hunt them down. I mean, wherever they're going to be, Israel will, without question, continue to try to assassinate them. There's no question. So, they will be provided safe passage. That's an absolutely meaningless point because Israel will hunt them down. Upon acceptance of this agreement, full aid will be immediately sent into the Gaza Strip, and the minimum aid quantities will be, at the minimum, 8 quantities will be consistent with what was included in the January the 19th, 2025 agreement. And then entry of distribution aid into Gaza will proceed without interference through the United Nations and the Red Crescent, in addition to other international institutions not associated in any manner with either party. I don't know whether that refers to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And then you have, this is what Gaza will be governed under a temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people in Gaza. Now, the problem that arises right away is Israel really going to allow this transitional governance to govern? I mean, it's like essentially it will depend on Israel handing over power to this authority. And of course, Israel would only hand over power to this authority. It's conditional upon Hamas being essentially disarmed and removed from Gaza. And that in turn will depend upon Israel determining that Hamas has indeed been disarmed and removed from Gaza. So everything just depends upon Israel. Israel is the one that is going to decide whether to hand over power to this temporary government. And then this committee will be made up of qualified Palestinians and international experts with oversight and supervision by a new international transitional body, the Board of Peace, which will be headed by President Trump. But of course, again, all of the members of this committee and board and whatever will be conditional on Israeli acceptance. This Israel is going to determine that because Israel essentially is in charge, nominally in charge of Gaza, and therefore, if Israel were to surrender power, Israel will then have to have the veto power on anyone else coming in and governing Gaza. And then, chairman of the board will be President Trump. Other members and heads of state to be announced, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair. The body will set the framework and handle funding for the redevelopment of Gaza until such time as the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program. So there they You have this international governing board, and then at some point they may or may not decide to hand power over to the Palestinian Authority. They will have to, before they do that, the Palestinian Authority will have to reform itself, and then who is to decide that the Palestinian Authority has reformed itself sufficiently as to merit the devolution of power on it? Obviously, Israel. And as we'll see, Netanyahu more or less said it's not going to happen. We're never going to sign off on the Palestinian Authority being ceded any power. Um, and then so in reform, and then it goes on. A Trump economic development plan to rebuild and energize Gaza will be created by convening a panel of experts who have felt blah blah. 11, special economic zone will be established, and then 12. This is I think the good thing for the Palestinians, which is no one will be forced to leave Gaza, and those who wish to leave will be free to do so and free to return. Now, again, you have to take it with a pinch of salt as to whether Israel will adhere to that. But that would be a first. It definitely would be a first for Israel to permit anybody to return. Israel, as we know, has never accepted a right of return. So anyone who leaves leaves at his own peril, because Israel will may or may not allow them to return. Nonetheless, here it says they will be free to return. And we would encourage people to stay and offer them the opportunity to build a better Gaza. So this is, I think, one of the most important points there for the Palestinians is that it's definitely a move away from Trump's insane Gaza Lago plan of last February, when he was suggesting that basically everyone who's in Gaza can leave, and then the United States will take it over and turn Gaza into the kind of the Riviera of the Eastern Mediterranean. And then Hamas and other factions agree to not have any role in the governance of Gaza, directly, indirectly, or in any form. All military terror and offensive infrastructure, including tunnels and weapon production facilities, will be destroyed and not rebuilt. There will be a process of demilitarization of Gaza and the supervision of independent monitors, which will include placing weapons permanently beyond use through an agreed process of decommissioning and supported by an internationally funded buyback and reintegration program. And then a guarantee will be provided by regional partners to ensure that Hamas and the fractions comply with their obligation that New Gaza poses no threat to its neighbors or its people. And then the United States will work with Arab and international partners to develop a temporary international stabilization force to immediately deploy in Gaza. Now, this goes back again, an international stabilization force will not be able to be deployed in Gaza unless Israel agrees to it. And Israel will not agree to it until Hamas, in every shape and form, will have been removed from Gaza. And Israel alone will decide whether Hamas has indeed been removed from Gaza. And then says the ISF will train and provide support to vetted Palestinian police forces in Gaza and will consult with Jordan and Egypt, who have extensive experience in the field. The ISF will work with Israel and Egypt to help secure border areas along with newly trained Palestinian forces. It is critical to prevent munitions from entering Gaza and to facilitate the rapid and secure flow of goods to rebuild and revitalize Gaza. All right, and then Then 16, Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. So that's written into the 20-point plan. But as we'll see, that's not exactly the way Israel sees it. That's not the way that Netanyahu sees it. Will not occupy or annex Gaza. As the ISF establishes control and stability, the Israel Defense Forces will withdraw based on standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization that will be agreed upon between the IDF, the ISF, the guarantors, and the United States. So you can see here that whether Israel withdraws from Gaza will depend entirely upon Israel. There's nothing at all to compel Israel to withdraw. It will withdraw based on standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization. So linked to demilitarization. So in other words, Israel will decide whether demilitarization has taken place. In other words, that Hamas has indeed been removed. All of the Hamas military infrastructure has been removed. So that's going to be decided by Israel. And therefore, only under those circumstances does Israel withdraw, and not withdraw completely, will withdraw based on standards, milestones, and timeframes. And what is the condition? With the objective of a secure Gaza that no longer poses a threat to Israel, Egypt, or its citizens. So apparently Gaza poses a threat to Egypt. Practically, the IDF will progressively hand over the Gaza territory it occupies to the ISF according to an agreement they will make with the transitional authority until they are withdrawn completely from Gaza. So this is all just left up in the air, this whole process of withdrawal. The IDF will progressively hand over the Gaza territory it occupies to the ISF according to an agreement they will make with the transitional authority until they are withdrawn completely from Gaza, save for a security perimeter presence that will remain until Gaza is properly secure from any resurgent terror threat. So there will be this security perimeter will be occupied by Israel in perpetuity. They're not withdrawing. Is properly secure from any resurgent terror threat. In the event Hamas delays or rejects this proposal, the above, including a scaled up aid operation, will proceed in the terror free areas handed over from the IDF to the ISF. And then an interfaith dialogue a process will be established while Gaza redevelopment advances and when the PA reform program is faithfully carried out. The conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. So this is about as vague as you can possibly get. 30 years ago, there was the Oslo Accords that actually talked about the establishment of a Palestinian state. Here we're talking about, well, there'll be a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination, which against Palestinian self-determination, I mean, that's been talked about for, I don't know, for decades. I mean, it goes back to 1948. And then statehood, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. And then the United States will establish a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree to a political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence. So, when you come back to this, you can see here that it doesn't amount to a great deal. Trump, of course, hailed this as one of the greatest moments in world history and so on. But the point here is that there really is no mechanism for Israeli withdrawal. and and there's all the talk about the board, the transitional authority, this international security force. None of it can come about without the go ahead from Israel. Um, and so the way it was presented, particularly by Trump, was that, and this is exactly what you would expect, which is that this is a take it or leave it proposal to Hamas. Hamas has to accept this in total, and if Hamas doesn't, then of course, Israel will unleash its fire and brimstone on Hamas, and the United States will fully support this. I have to take a look at this a picture. Marty has joined us. Always very good to see you, Marty. And I have to say, I mean, one of the people there is obviously Maya Sandu, the Moldovan president. But let's just take a look closer at the picture. Oh, that's the World Economic Forum, the former World Economic Forum guy. There they are, happily standing around. Um, isn't it so happy? Well, that's what she is. She's part of that world. She's a World Bank economist, a Sorosite, parachuted in, and have to make sure she steals every election because there's no way that Moldova will vote for her. Yeah, so thank you for that illuminating photograph. So that's the way it's done. Hamas has to accept this um, as boom, as a take it or leave it package. Take it or leave it. You can't negotiate anything in there. Oh, Marty's got another picture. Let me look at this other picture. Oh, I know this one. This one I have seen. So this again, Maya Sandu, and this is the young Soros, Alex Soros. He looks such a complete dweeb. It's I mean, at least his father had that kind of an aura, or kind of very sinister figure. Really is one of those James Bond villains. With a furry, fluffy Persian cat purring on his lap, and his father looked the part, particularly with his thick Hungarian accent. But the young Soros just looks such a dweeb. I mean, he's the kind of guy you see all the time in Brooklyn, hanging out at these various we work kind of startups. They're all vaguely and doing kind of internet startups. You see them all the time there in Brooklyn, New York. That's how he looks. So, he commands billions, totally malevolent figure, but he just looks like a typical Brooklyn dweeb. Um, um, so as I say, the way it was done was to wrong foot Hamas and say, well, it's take it or leave it. If you take it, you actually have to surrender, give up all your arms, give up the hostages, give up all your negotiating means. Um, you'll be able to leave, maybe. You certainly can't expect that you won't be assassinated by Israel wherever you go. In fact, almost certainly you will be, because that's what Israel does. So you give everything up, um, and there's really no guarantee that Israel will not resume its attacks, its bombing at any moment. There's no guarantee here. Everything depends upon Israel determining that its security concern. There's Klaus Schwab. So R. Brown says, "Good to see Klaus Schwab fully clothed. I still have nightmares from his summer bikini pics from Monte Carlo." I never saw those pictures. I'm happy to say. So yeah, that is good. Um, so that basically there's really no guarantee at all. So Hamas just surrenders, and there's some vague talk. We'll have this transitional authority. Um, International security force. But none of that can happen unless Israel thinks that, oh, well, our security concerns have been satisfied, and therefore we are ready to hand over power, hand over um, to force to some international Arab security force. So Trump is saying, well, you've got 3 days to Hamas, 3 days in which to make up your mind, and if you don't go along with it, then we have Israel. Israel will unleash whatever it's got against you. The but so that's in other words, there's no mention here that Hamas has any right to renegotiate anything. All this was decided upon first between Trump and these various Arab states, and then subsequently there were the negotiations between Trump's people, which is Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and Netanyahu's people, and they made all sorts of changes to the plan, which made it even more favorable to Israel. Um, but it was what was really revealing was the news conference in the White House afterwards, and well, this is the joint statement, which is very interesting because the joint statement by the foreign ministers of Qatar, Jordan, UAE, Indonesia, Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, they all kind of approve of this, even though the deal is essentially capitulation to Israel. But they all approve of it, so, commending Trump's leadership, his sincere efforts to end the war in Gaza. Now, I don't rebuke them for this because this war is just terrible. It's been 2 years, and it's perfectly understandable that, I mean, everybody wants this war to end. I mean, the notion that it can just simply continue. So, you can understand why anybody would say, look, let's just end this war. I mean, this horror can't go on forever. But the ministers welcomed the announcement by President Trump regarding his proposal to end the war, rebuild Gaza, prevent the displacement of the Palestinian people, and advance a comprehensive peace as well. And The ministers affirmed their readiness to engage positively and constructively with the United States and the parties towards finalizing the agreement and ensuring its implementation in a manner that ensures peace, security, and stability for the people of the region. And then they reaffirmed their joint commitment to work with the United States and end the war in Gaza through a comprehensive deal that ensures unrestricted delivery of sufficient humanitarian aid, no displacement of the Palestinians, the release of the hostages. And that's the no displacement of the Palestinians is what they're hailing as their great victory, which is that there it is in that 20-point plan that the Palestinians will not be displaced from Gaza. No mention, and that's an interesting one, no mention anywhere within these 20 points, anything at all about the West Bank, after all the strong statements that Trump had been making in the days running up to the Netanyahu meeting about how he will not accept the annexation of the West Bank. Was just no mention of anything in the West Bank, and the mention of the Palestinian Authority, as we saw, was highly perfunctory. Really very, very little acknowledgement, which is contrary to the the New York Declaration by France and Saudi Arabia, the one that was overwhelmingly adopted by the UN General Assembly. And then full Israeli, they mentioned a full Israeli withdrawal. There isn't going to be a full Israeli withdrawal. We've seen that. Rebuilds Gaza and creates a path for just peace on the basis of the two-state solution, under which Gaza is fully integrated with the West Bank in a Palestinian state in accordance with international law as a key to achieving regional stability and security. That's their position. That's the position of all these governments. There's nothing in there in that the Trump 20-point plan about that. Gaza fully integrated with the West Bank in a Palestinian state in accordance with international law as the key to achieving regional stability and security. Nothing at all about that in the plan. And now, this was very interesting. This was prior to the meeting with Netanyahu. Trump made Netanyahu apologize to Qatar. And he had to do that because Qatar wasn't willing to go on acting as a mediator after what Israel did a couple of weeks ago when it launched its attack on Doha on the Hamas leaders who were negotiating Trump's ceasefire plan. And so this obviously was a bit of an embarrassment for Trump. And Qatar said, well, we're not going to continue acting as a mediator if we are still under threat from an attack by Israel. And so Trump told Netanyahu to telephone the Prime Minister of Qatar and apologize to him. And here's the White House description of what happened. Today, President Trump hosted a trilateral phone call with His Excellency Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and His Excellency Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman bin Jassim Al Thani of Qatar. The President expressed his desire to put Israeli-Qatar relations on a positive track after years of mutual grievances and miscommunication. After years of mutual grievances, it was an Israeli attack on a state that was acting as a mediator with the approval and consent of the United States, and so there was no mutual grievances and miscommunications. And then he goes, the leaders accepted the president's proposal to establish a trilateral mechanism to enhance coordination, improve communication, blah, blah. As a first step, Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed his deep regret that Israel's missile strike against Hamas fighters in Qatar unintentionally killed a Qatari serviceman. So notice what he's done here. He's only expressing regret that he unintentionally killed a Qatari serviceman. Not that he launched an unprovoked attack against a non-combatant, and it was an unprovoked attack against a state that was acting as a peacemaker. That's not what he apologized. He that unintentionally killed a Qatari serviceman. No, it was unintentional. He further expressed regret that in targeting Hamas leadership during hostage negotiations, Israel violated Qatar's sovereignty and affirmed that Israel will not conduct such an attack in the future. Prime Minister Al Thani welcomed these assurances, emphasizing Qatar's readiness to continue contributing meaningfully to regional security and stability. Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed commitment to the same. And then the leaders discussed the proposal for ending the war in Gaza, blah, blah. All right, so, and then this was the news conference. So this was the so Trump releases the 20-point plan. meets Netanyahu, and then they had their news conference. Given the things that were said in the news conference, really, it becoming more and more vitiating any reality to this plan. So here's Trump says, but if accepted by Hamas, that's the 20 point. If accepted by Hamas, this proposal calls for the release of all remaining hostages immediately, but in no case more than 72 hours. So this is a little different. So it's now the 72 hours begins not from the moment that Israel accepts it, which is what it says in the 20-point plan, because we assume, given what Trump said, that Israel has accepted it. So the 72 hours, according to the plan, would have started yesterday. But now it says 72 hours starts from the moment that Hamas agrees to the plan. So the hostages are coming back. Under the plan, Arab and Muslim countries have committed, and in writing in many cases, but I actually would take their word for it, the people I mentioned, I take their word for it, to demilitarize Gaza, and that's quickly, decommission the military capabilities of Hamas and all other terrorist organizations. Do that immediately. We're relying on the countries that I named and others to deal with Hamas, and I'm hearing that Hamas wants to get this done too, and destroy all terror infrastructure, including the tunnels, weapons, and production facilities. And then all parties will agree on a timeline for Israeli forces to withdraw in phases. So all parties will agree, they haven't agreed yet, will agree on a timeline for Israeli forces to withdraw in phases. But Israel is the one who's going to be, no one has any means at all to force Israel to do anything. So Israel is going to decide what the timeline will be and what these phases amount to. We talked before about these. We said it was in that plan about these standards that have to be met. And then Arab and Muslim nations need to be allowed the chance to fulfill these commitments of dealing with Hamas. They have to deal with them because they were the one group that we have not dealt with. I haven't dealt with them. But the Arab countries and the Muslim countries are going to be dealing with Hamas, and I believe they've already been there. I think they probably have an understanding. They haven't mentioned that, but I would imagine they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone so far as they've gone. If they're unable to do so, then Israel would have the absolute right and actually our full backing, the U.S. full backing. So that's the U.S. full backing. Hamas. So it's a take it or leave it. If presenting it, here's this thing. We haven't negotiated. Trump is saying we haven't negotiated with Hamas. We've basically got this plan negotiated with these Arab and Muslim countries. Then it was renegotiated additionally with Israel, and then we presented it with Hamas. Hamas has 72 hours basically to agree to this. Though that's vague, what the timetable is as to how much time Hamas has to agree. The 72. Trump has said at various times they've got 72 hours to agree, and then there's 72 hours before the hostages are released. And then Israel would have my full backing to finish the job of destroying the threat of Hamas. Well, the problem is an obvious one, because that Israel would not be doing anything that it isn't already doing, and doing it with the approval of the United States. So in other words, it's not exactly some horrific threat, because that's exactly what Israel is already doing. So Israel would have my full backing to finish the job of destroying the threat of Hamas. Moreover, Israel hasn't succeeded. That's why the war has gone on for 2 years, because Israel has not succeeded in destroying Hamas. But I hope we're going to have a deal for peace. If Hamas rejects the deal, which is always possible, They're the only one left. Everyone else has accepted it. I love this one. Everyone else was accepted it. Hamas was not in the negotiations. I mean, this is classic. I mean, I know I'm always talking about this. This is classic. Exactly what was done with the Serbs in the 1990s. Serbs are always being presented with a kind of take it or leave it deal. They were never consulted on any aspect of the deal. They were just simply presented with it and said, "Well, take it or leave it." And if you leave it, I mean, we're not you're not in any position to negotiate any part of this. We're not going to negotiate it with you. But if you leave it and you don't accept our ultimatum, we're just going to bomb you. So here they said, well, if you don't accept it, even though you had no part in negotiating any of this, and you don't have the right now to come back and say, well, we like the framework, but we'd like to uh, deal with some of the details. I mean, all of that, of course, you can't do it. You said, no, 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 you have to accept the whole thing, as a package. This is not an a la carte agreement. This is, the whole package. But of course, the Arab and the Muslim states should have negotiated on Hamas's behalf and should have tried to get a better deal, but they didn't. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, the U.S. wasn't willing to negotiate with Hamas. Then it was up to the other Arab Muslim states to get a better deal. Um, Anyway, then he goes on. Everyone understands that the ultimate result must be the elimination of any danger posed in the region, and the danger is caused by Hamas. So this is, you can see here, Trump's very one-sided view. I mean, nothing surprising there. He said the other day, I'm on Israel's side. I've always been on Israel's side. And then to ensure the success, we have the Board of Peace, beautiful name, the Board of Peace, and which he will head. And then we'll do it right. We're going to put leaders from our other countries. They're leaders, very distinguished leaders, and so on. And there once there will be UK former Prime Minister Tony Blair, good man, very good man, and some others. They'll be named over the next few days. And then it says, if the Palestinian Authority does not complete the reforms that I laid out in my vision for peace in 2020, they'll have only themselves to blame. We're giving them an amazing footprint, and they have an amazing support from the leaders of the Arab world and the Muslim world. They're great leaders. These are great leaders. These are unbelievable leaders, and so on. What the future holds for the Palestinians, no one really knows. But the plan that we put forward today is focused on ending the war immediately, getting all of our hostages back. Again, you see, all of our hostages. What is our hostage? There was only that one an American hostage who was released, so there are no more American hostages. So keep in mind also that Hamas released that American hostage because Hamas was under the impression that this would be looked upon favorably by Trump, and therefore Trump would apply pressure against Israel, which he didn't do. Trump took the winnings, got the American out, and that didn't do anything for Hamas. And then so again, nothing here, just for on the Palestinian Authority. And then Netanyahu speaks, and he says, "I support your plan to end the war in Gaza, which achieves our war aims." So that's nice. So that's it. Your plan achieves our war aims. So there's very little pretense here that this is some sort of a compromise. It will bring back to Israel all our hostages, dismantle Hamas's military capabilities and its political rule, and ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel. So that's very nice for Israel. Nothing there for the Palestinians. Your plan is consistent with the 5 principles my government set for the end of the war and the day after Hamas. Everybody asks, what is your plan for the day after Hamas? Here's our plan. Passed in the cabinet, all our hostages, both those who are alive and those who died, all of them will return home immediately. Hamas will be disarmed. Gaza will be demilitarized. Israel will retain security responsibility, including a security perimeter for the foreseeable future. There it is. He says it up front. Israel will not be leaving Gaza. Israel will retain security responsibility. Trump may talk about this international security force, but Netanyahu he said it right in front of Trump. Israel will retain security responsibility, including a security perimeter for the foreseeable future. And lastly, Gaza will have a peaceful civilian administration that is run neither by Hamas nor by the Palestinian Authority. If Hamas agrees to your plan, Mr. President, the first step will be a modest withdrawal. Modest withdrawal. It's very, very modest. It will be extremely modest. Followed by the release of all our hostages within 72 hours. The next step will be the establishment of an international body charged with fully disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Gaza. So Israel does not withdraw. They make a modest withdrawal, and then the demilitarization, disarming of Hamas really takes pace, being done by somebody else, which is very nice for Israel, because Israel really isn't very keen on getting into hand-to-hand combat. So somebody else is going to be disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Gaza. But Israel has not withdrawn from Gaza, so the disarming and dismantlement is being left in the hands of others. Very, very nice for Israel. Now, if this international body succeeds, we will have permanently ended the war. We got somebody else to do our work for us. Somebody else would have disarmed Hamas. We didn't have to lose any lives. Somebody did it for us. Israel will conduct further withdrawals linked to the extent of the disarmament and demilitarization, but will remain in the security perimeter for the foreseeable future. No withdrawal. And I think we should understand that we're giving everybody a chance to have this done peacefully, something that will achieve all our war objectives without any further bloodshed. But if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself. Well, that's, anyone can threaten to do anything. Israel's had 2 years to finish the job by itself. It hasn't succeeded. This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way, but it will be done. We prefer the easy way, but it has to be done. All these goals must be achieved because we didn't fight this horrible fight, sacrifice the finest of our young men to have Hamas stay in Gaza and threaten us again and again and again with these horrific massacres. As for the Palestinian Authority, I appreciate your firm position that the Palestinian Authority can have no role whatsoever in Gaza without undergoing a radical and genuine transformation. Trump didn't quite say that, but you could certainly read between the lines that is what he's saying, and that is the 20-point plan is suggesting that. Keep in mind, the Palestinian Authority has come out in support of Trump's plan. So that's after all that. The Palestinian Authority said, yeah, we support this Trump plan. Can have no role whatsoever in Gaza without undergoing radical and genuine transformation. In your 2020 peace plan, which you mentioned just now, you made clear what the transformation requires. Not lip service, it's checking in a box. It's a fundamental, genuine, and enduring transformation. That means ending pay to slay, changing the poisonous textbooks that teach hatred of Jews to Palestinian children, stopping incitement in the media, ending lawfare against Israel at the ICC and ICJ. So that's quite a number of changes that they would have to undergo. And again, there's going to be no role. Israel will get to decide all these things, recognizing the Jewish state and many, many other reforms. Imagine all this. This is all the things that the Palestinian Authority is obligated to do, according to Netanyahu. So, ending pay to slay, which is, ending payments to the families of Palestinians whom Israel has killed. So no compensation for the families. Changing the poisonous textbooks. So that's the that teach hatred of that's the education system. Stopping incitement in the media. Ending lawfare against Israel. So therefore, that's it. Don't bring any more cases against Israel at the ICC and ICJ. And then recognizing the Jewish state, which they've done, but of course that's, but but of course the corollary of that is that of course Israel has never recognized um, a state for the Palestinians. Or certainly they haven't even recognized that there exists such a thing as the Palestinian people. So that, but they are under an obligation to recognize the Jewish state. Notice he also uses that language of the Jewish state. Doesn't say recognize Israel, it's the Jewish state. In other words, it's a state of the Jews. So the Arabs who live there, that's not their state. So that's the Jewish state. So it's a state of the Jews, not of anyone else other than not the state of any non-Jewish citizens of Israel, and many other reforms. Wow, that's quite a list. It won't come as a surprise to you that the vast majority of Israelis have no faith that the Palestinian Authority leopard will change its spots. But rather than wait for this miraculous transformation, your plan provides a practical and realistic path forward for Gaza in the coming years, in which Gaza will be administered neither by Hamas nor by the Palestinian Authority, but by those committed to a genuine peace with Israel. And that's the news conference. So as we can see here, that this plan really is pretty much everything that Israel had wanted. The only gains you could say that the Palestinians made, or the Arab states and the Muslims made, was the part of the plan is there will be no ethnic cleansing of Gaza. The Palestinians will stay. So the whole Gaza Lago plan, that's gone. The Palestinians will stay there, um, and whoever wants to go somewhere will be able to return. It's it's about the only part of it. All right. So before we go on to the other things, let's take a look at some of our comments from our Gagglers, our board, the people who make the Gaggle possible, contribute to the tip jar and contribute to the upkeep of the dogs. And a DJ, good to see you, DJ. I haven't seen you in a while. It says, "Woof woof. What are your thoughts on the on Charlie Kirk, on the Charlie Kirk circus?" Well, I mean, we talked about this last week. I haven't seen any. Um, I haven't seen any particularly compelling evidence of any Israeli involvement in the death of Charlie Kirk. Now, there have been suspicions cast on Israel and so on. So, as things stand, you have to think that the responsibility lies with some of these somewhat crazy Antifa, transgender, you know, groups, um, as in terms of what the evidence has shown, because I haven't seen any alternative theories put forward. So I mean, so you have those who call into question the official story. Okay, you always have that. But the problem, this is we've talked before about, as with the Kennedy assassination and so on, is that the problem with, if you cast doubt on this or that aspect of the official story, then you're under some obligation to come up with an alternative explanation and to provide some evidence for an alternative um, hypothesis as to who killed Charlie Kirk. So if you say, okay, I don't believe that it was this young guy with his transgender boyfriend. All right, um, then who did it? What and how how was this done? And what's the evidence that there was somebody else who did this? So the problem is always that, yes, you can always call into question this or that aspect of the official story, but there is a sort of an obligation to say, well, okay, well, you don't believe this, despite the evidence that does point to this person. You don't believe that evidence. Okay, what's your explanation? What's your alternative theory of the case? All right, and then if you have that, then and what evidence do you have to back that up? And so that's why, and I'm we talked a number of times here on the Gaggle about the Kennedy assassination. That's why I accept the Kennedy assassination, the official explanation, because I haven't seen any um, reasonably credible alternative theories. It all comes to everyone casting doubts on the inadequacies of the Warren Commission. But there's already there's so much evidence that already came out about the Kennedy assassination. I haven't seen any um, credible theory of in somebody else who was responsible, and how it was done by the somebody else who managed to somehow disappear. So at the moment, and I have to say, that's what it's looking like and particularly as the people who who were around, this among these transgender, among Antifa and so on, they are quite violent. There's a lot of violence about it. These aren't peaceful people. They are quite violent. So it's not implausible that these were the culprits. Now, that's I'm not sure though that he was a lone assassin. That there may have been a conspiracy um, to kill Charlie Kirk. I mean, I think the conspiracy involved this group that Tyler Robinson was involved in. So it's a group of those people. I think that there may well have been a conspiracy among them, and that he wasn't the lone assassin. But that's, I think, where the evidence is pointing. So I may, maybe I'll be wrong. I mean, maybe as more evidence emerges, I'll say no, I was wrong. But at the moment, I think that's where the evidence points, and um, and they, however much people want to believe that somebody else may have been involved, that there was a vast conspiracy. I haven't seen the any evidence for that. But okay, we're going to keep an open mind. There hasn't been a trial yet. We haven't really had any legal proceedings yet. But what we've seen so far does point towards him. Um, anyway, Anne Marie, very good to see you. Welcome, Anne Marie. Anne Marie is a resident musical expert, a very distinguished classical musician, who plays a very distinguished orchestra, has played in some of the best orchestras in the world, and has worked with some of the leading composers and conductors of our time. So we're really very fortunate to have her here, and to have enjoy her expertise and her comments on music, because they come from somebody who has played it, and somebody from the inside. So whenever we have our postings on the Gaggle Music Club, it's always a rare treat when Anne Marie's able to weigh in and come illuminate a piece of music, which coming from her own personal experience of having played the music. So it's a rare treat for us to have her here, and so really appreciate it. And I, I I urge everyone, to look at the Gaggle Music Club, listen to the music. I select the music, but what I think is the real treat is when Anne Marie offers some very very um, illuminating insights into the work. So I think it's one of the perks of being a member of the Gaggle, of our locals community, that you get to enjoy good music, but also enjoy Anne Marie's extraordinary commentary. So thank you so much, Anne Marie. And here we have, yeah, we got the pictures of of the distinguished, very very distinguished um, uh, president of Moldova. Stolen election, absolutely stole it in plain sight. And does it every time. She did it last year with a presidential election, did it last year with the EU referendum. And the amazing thing is that this most recent parliamentary election, they only managed to pull it off with the diaspora vote in Western Europe. I mean, they I don't know how many polling places they managed to create in Western Europe for the Moldovan diaspora. They only had two in Russia, only two. They provided only 10,000 ballots for those two polling stations in Russia, but only 4,000 managed to vote, even though I don't know, several hundred thousand Moldovans live in Russia, where far more Moldovans live in Russia than live in Western Europe, but they didn't get to vote. But you know, all the Moldovans living in Western Europe, they practically had their own personal polling station. But even so, I think Maya Sandu's party, Party of Action and Solidarity, or whatever PAS, still lost the vote in Moldova proper. She only managed to pull it off when the diaspora vote came in. So the diaspora vote, which was, as I say, stolen, absolutely stolen, because the Moldovan diaspora in Russia couldn't vote. So that's the only way that Maya Sandu managed to get over that 50% line. So she got, I think, something like 50.02% of the vote. That's after the a number of I think it's something like six political parties were banned from taking part in the election. Two, within 48 hours of the actual vote, they were just simply banned. And of course, all the news outlets, the TV stations, all of them were, of course, banned. The ones who were deemed to be pro-Russian, and there was only I think, a 52% turnout. A 52% turnout is a joke. It means half the country didn't even think it was worth the vote. I mean, because I guess half the country knew this would be stolen. So why bother even voting? It will be stolen. But on the basis of that, on the basis of this outright theft, the basis of the ban on political parties, ban on opposition TV stations, um, the the Western media hail this as a fantastic victory for pro EU, pro European forces. They prevailed over Moscow. So there was a complete and utter farce, but it's now become the norm in Europe. The next up, we'll talk about it. I think in our next live stream will be they want to get Ukraine and Moldova somehow into the EU, not because they're interested. They want the Ukraine and the Moldova in the EU, but they want to just essentially, you know, use Ukraine and Moldova, of course, to attack Russia. So, I mean, there are all these countries in the Balkans who have been waiting year in, year out, waiting to be allowed to join the EU, where they got Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, Macedonia. Uh, but they're going to have to wait. And because Moldova and Ukraine have priority, but the problem they have there is Hungary. Now, according to the EU rules, there has to be unanimity. In other words, everybody in the EU has to agree on the beginning of some of the negotiation toward accession process. And Hungary has said, no, we're not going to accept. We're not going to accept, definitely not Ukraine, and we won't accept Moldova. So the EU is now trying to figure out how they can get around the Hungary problem. How can they begin this accession process without Hungary? I mean, this has to be unanimity. So then they're the moment heading toward that they begin the process on sort of qualified majority voting. So it doesn't have to be unanimous. Now, but the final vote on accession, that does have to be unanimous. But I think the EU is figuring that if they can just simply begin the accession process now, Orban might lose next year's election, and then they won't have to worry about Orban anymore. And then, that'll be the problem. So they're trying to get around their own rules, trying to get around the whole process of democracy to begin this whole Ukraine-Moldova accession process, and ignore the requirement of unanimity, and then hope that Orban will be gone next year. But we'll talk about a little more about that, I think, next time, because it's kind of interesting. And where are we? Yes, we go back. So yes, R. Brown says, I was glad to have missed those pictures of, Klaus Schwab in a bikini. That's not a pretty sight. So that's I had no idea that this was circulating on the internet. So that's a pretty gruesome thought. But thank you, Dennis Misty. Thank you very much. He says, of course, war is the perfect lie word used by the media worldwide. Well, yes, it is. And I think that what they're now doing, particularly in the case of Russia, is to keep suggesting that we're at war with Russia. Of course, they use these terms in a, they don't quite mean it in a literal way, because they don't really want to scare the public. I mean, if you said we are at war with Russia, the public will start getting very nervous, and they'll turn against their political leaders and say, what the hell have you done in getting us into a war with a nuclear superpower? So what they do is say, we're in a war with Russia, but it's a new kind of war. Oh, it's a new kind of war. Oh, it's a hybrid war. Oh, it's a hybrid war. Nobody knows what that means. They say, oh, that's it. We're in a hybrid war with Russia. Ah, hybrid war. And then they tell us that, oh, this was invented by Gerasimov. it's not totally untrue. Gerasa would never talk about this hybrid war, but say, oh yeah, Russia is waging a hybrid war against us, and then you say, well, what exactly is entailed by this hybrid war? They say, well, all sorts of things, everything that goes wrong, we can blame on Russia. So, there's suddenly an electricity cutout somewhere. I say, oh, that was Russia. There was a cyber attack from Russia. Oh, the blackout. Oh, there's a blackout. Oh, Russia. Um, there's a fire in some warehouse somewhere. Ah, Russia. So, uh, and there's a fire in a shopping mall, Russia. So what they've done now is that every single thing that ever goes wrong anywhere in Europe, it's like always blame on Russia. Say, well, this is part of Russia's hybrid war. Or then say, oh, there's an attack on our underwater sea cables. Oh, attack on underwater sea cables. That's Russia. No evidence ever presented that Russia has ever damaged any underwater sea cables. But they can just say, every time the underwater sea cables damaged, oh, it's Russia. And now we have this nonsense of drones, popping up in airspace. They cross into airspace, 2 meters into airspace. Oh, it's Russia. So when you say they used by media, because of what when you keep talking about this hybrid war that Russia is waging, you're essentially providing a justification for imposing all kinds of repressive policies, which is part and parcel of any war. You guys, repressive policies on the internet, repressive policies on speech, and that's really what all this talk of hybrid war is about: to give governments more and more powers. Because Russia is ubiquitous; it's everywhere. It's trying to destroy our way of life. So we have to give governments more powers to deal with this hybrid threat. It's just lurking everywhere. It's under the bed, over the bed, on the roof, in the basement, everywhere there are Russians. So you have to give power to the government. So that's why this war has now become this part and parcel of this media government alliance. You can't pick up any paper, The Guardian or Politico, without hearing about what's the latest on this hybrid war that Russia is waging against us. Anyway, thank you, Dennis Misty. Anne Marie says, if it's true that Israel wants to create a greater Israel and always has wanted to, how is this to be achieved within the framework of this proposed peace agreement? In other words, how is it possible to conclude a peace agreement, which is supposed to mean peace, and at the same time want to create this greater Israel, which would only be possible through further military force? Well, that's a very good question, and I think that's in a way why the Arab and Muslim countries have been so relieved by this 20-point plan, because yes, they say, all right, Israel gets what it wants in that, okay, well, Hamas is dismantled, they get to remain occupying Gaza. However, Israel has not accomplished the goal that ultimately everyone was afraid Israel might accomplish, which is the complete and ethnic cleansing of Gaza. So that is because everyone has been afraid of the Greater Israel project, so that they want to remove all of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. But Israel has not accomplished that. That's why I think these Arab and Muslim nations kind of breathed a sigh of relief and signed on to this 20-point plan, because it says there will be no removal of the Palestinians from Gaza. And say, well, that's it. Thank God we've at least accomplished that they will remain. Now, um, that's I think the problem for Israel, which is that they of course are committed to the Greater Israel project, but in order to accomplish the Greater Israel project, they would have to remove the Palestinians. That's a very tall order. First of all, it requires a great deal of military force. The Palestinians are absolutely refusing to leave. Um, and Israel is just not very good and not very willing to fight in a kind of in the sort of very nasty hand-to-hand combat, which would be required to remove 2 million Palestinians from Gaza, let alone everyone from the West Bank. So what Israel has tried to do, rather than do that, is to make conditions inside Gaza as horrible as possible, so as to encourage Palestinian departures, and therefore, once you leave, and you can never come back. So that's why, again, in that 20-point plan, it says anyone who leaves is able to come back. And this is the one the what the Arab and the Muslim states were insistent upon, because they're absolutely terrified that what Israel really wants is to drive all of the Palestinians out. So once they've done that, then the Greater Israel project has to be put on the back burner. I think it's they of course Israel has wanted to do this, but it's never really figured out how Israel how it can accomplish this, because it's just the first of all, you need a great deal of force. Second of all, you need other Arab states who are willing to go along with it, because you have 2 million in Gaza, you have about several million in the West Bank. Where exactly are they going to go? Because all of the Arab states have said we will not cooperate with any kind of ethnic cleansing program. We're not, there's no room in the Sinai. We're not going to build cities for the Palestinians in the Sinai. No room in Saudi Arabia. No one will cooperate with Israel in this project. And I think that's why Benny Morris said, I think some years ago in an interview, that Israel missed the bus in 1948. Israel had an opportunity to drive the Palestinians, all of them, out. They didn't do it then, and now they have to live with it. They have to live with the Palestinians. As that the Greater Israel project could have been accomplished then, but it didn't. And so that's why I think I don't now see how they can do it. Now they can go on making life miserable for the Gazans, but they are absolutely these people are absolutely refused to leave. They will not leave, and the Arab states will not cooperate in any way with any Israeli ethnic cleansing program. So that's why both these people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, they can talk whatever they like, but they don't know how they can accomplish this goal. And I think that's really Israel's problem, which is when these fantasies that they engage in. Oh, we'll crush Hamas, defeat Hamas. Well, they've had 2 years to do this. Okay, they've killed all the Hamas leaders. That's it. They've all been killed. They still, but that doesn't mean they can they can destroy Hamas, because you've been killed the leaders. There's going to be somebody else who's going to take over. There's always, because the children today, well, they're going to grow up, and the moment they grow up, the 8-year-old child now becomes 16 or 17. Well, he's going to take up arms against Israel. It's total fantasy world. That somehow, if you kill these leaders, you don't have a problem anymore. because Israel has it's over the years it's gone on killing and killing and killing leaders without being able to in any way eliminate Palestinian resistance. So I don't think that they can accomplish this the Greater Israel project. So they can go on talking about it. They can go on making life miserable for the Palestinians, but I don't see how um, they can make any real progress on that. Because killing several million people, that's a tall order. Because that's what they'd have to do. They would have to just kill everybody, because otherwise, no state will cooperate with Israel in any ethnic cleansing project. Anyway, thank you so much, Anne Marie. And then R. Brown 1950 says, ironically, in Mein Kampf, Hitler wrote the treaties and agreements were entered into when the terms were beneficial and could be broken whenever breaking them was beneficial. So in August 1939, the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. Less than 2 years later, they launched Operation Barbarossa. I think Bibi will follow that model. He'll keep Trump on board if he plays ball now. In the next 2 years, Israel or MI6 or CIA will run some false flags up and blame the other side for breaking the deal. Well, I'm sure that they will, I think, do that. And Israel has no compunction about bombing anyone, any state, carrying out assassinations anywhere. That's they feel completely justified. And I heard Alan Dershowitz. He was on Piers Morgan, and he was trying to justify Israel's attack on the Hamas leaders in Qatar, who were negotiating the ceasefire plan. He said, "Oh well, they're terrorists, and according to international law, you can you can hit terrorists anywhere, anytime." Of course, it's absolute nonsense. There's nothing in international law that says you can go and attack non-belligerent states, and the states that you're not at war with, because somebody that you don't like resides there. I mean, Israel may think that it's acting according to national law, but that simply isn't true. No, and no one has ever done it. I mean, the British did not bomb Dublin because during the troubles in Northern Ireland, the British didn't bomb Dublin because there may be IRA leaders living in Dublin. Um, and the Americans didn't bomb Paris when Paris provided refuge to the Black Panthers. I mean, Black Panthers who wanted for murder in the United States, left the country and went to Paris. Again, the Americans may have they wanted France to hand them over. France didn't do that, but the Americans didn't take matters into their own hands and start assassinating people in the streets of Paris. But Dershowitz seems to think, oh, Israel is perfectly entitled to do this, and then he said, oh well, I was against that because it failed. That's his only standard. Oh well, I was against that attack on Doha because the plan failed. They didn't actually kill any of the Hamas leaders. The thing about the Ribbentrop-Molotov, I mean, it's very interesting because Barbarossa is quite remarkable in that it's hard to think of any comparable act ever in history. I mean, maybe going back, I don't know when, in which a state attacked another state without a pretext, without an ultimatum, without a set of events that could justify, that without any real explanation, any political crisis, in other words, there was no excuse, no justification that Hitler could provide for Barbarossa. There was nothing. The relations 39 to 41 between Germany and the Soviet Union were cordial. Anything that the Soviet Union wanted, anything that Germany wanted from the Soviet Union helped. The Soviet Union provided assistance. So there was really, Hitler was unable to proffer any kind of a justification for the attack. And there was nothing. I mean, there was nothing. There was nothing preceding it. No diplomatic crisis, no ultimatum, no set of demands. There was what other set of demands, territorial demands, political demands. None. I mean, it was unable even to come up with any remote pretext for this attack. So that was kind of a very I mean, it's in a way, it's a sort of it resembles Israel. Israel just simply launches attacks on some very dubious justification and wages wars against pretty much all of its neighbors. So yeah, I mean that's in a way that there is an analogy there. And then Cynthia, it was good to see you. Thank you, Cynthia. And Cynthia, I should also say, is our film expert, and with an extraordinary encyclopedic knowledge about films and cinema history. And so when we have the part of the locals community, when we have our screenings, our Monday screenings, we tend to screen a pretty good film. So, and Cynthia always provides really fascinating, informative, and really outstanding commentary to accompany the film. So, you can watch the film and learn a great deal about the making of the film, the actors, the critical reception, any issues that arose from the film. So you can watch a great film as part of the perks of our membership, and you can read Cynthia's amazing commentary. And I'm always learning from Cynthia's commentary. So yesterday we showed The Wicker Man, which is, I think, one of the best films of the 1970s, one of the great films of British cinema. And so it's an outstanding film to watch, but you can watch that and read everything that Cynthia provided for our own for our own background perusal, so you can learn a great deal more about the film. So thank you very much for that, Cynthia. And then Cynthia says, why is the peace proposal always about disarming Hamas? This is particularly absurd given that Gazans have sticks and stones, while Israel has 4,000-pound bombs they use indiscriminately in any case. Trump's real plan is the Gaza Riviera, a real estate plan for the mega rich, with the Palestinians living in concentration camps, housing restricted by digital IDs. Well, you're absolutely right, and that's a very interesting point. Is that why is it always about disarming Hamas? There's never really any talk about disarming Israel, and as when we went through this the deal and then the comments from Trump and Netanyahu, it's clear that there is no Israeli withdrawal. So to speak. I mean, the disarming is all about Hamas. It's Hamas who has to disarm, and Israel will get to decide whether the disarming and the decommissioning and the destruction of the infrastructure has indeed taken place. No one else but Israel will decide it. But then you can argue, you can say it's exactly the same as the issue of nuclear weapons. So you have this crisis by, and Trump says this, and all the Europeans say, oh, Iran must not be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Now remember, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. Iran has already said it has no intention of having nuclear weapons. No one has ever provided any evidence that Iran does have nuclear weapons, or that Iran does have a nuclear weapons program, or it tends to acquire nuclear weapons. And yet Israel gets to shape the discussion and say, oh, well, Iran must not be allowed to have nuclear weapons, even though Iran is a non-nuclear weapon state. Iran is a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel is not. Israel has nuclear weapons, but that's not brought up. So Iran, which actually does cooperate with the IAEA, Israel does not. And Israel just never signed, one of the very few states that never signed on to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And yet, you know, the media will always talk about, oh, the threat posed by Iran's nuclear weapons. And Israel gets to bomb Iran alongside the United States because of Iran's nuclear program. And I said, but it's an attack by Israel. Israel is a nuclear weapons power. It's not a nuclear. It's not a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel has never even admitted that it has nuclear weapons. I mean, it's at least other states who have nuclear weapons have all admitted that they have them. Israel has never admitted that it has them, even though we all know it has them. But apparently, all the crisis is brought about because of Iran. So that's how you say, why is it always Hamas who has to disarm and not Israel? Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. Yeah, Hamas is a threat to Israel. How is Hamas a threat? Let's say let's say October the 7th. Okay. Um, Israel had already, by the end of the day on October the 7th, Israel had already pushed out Hamas from Israel. It was already over. I mean, that was done. I mean, obviously Hamas killed people. Many incidentally who were military. But it was over by that day. By October the 7th, already Hamas had already been driven out of Israel. Hamas poses no serious military threat to Israel. Neither Palestinian Authority poses no threat whatsoever to Israel. Lebanon poses no threat to Israel. Hezbollah poses no threat to Israel. And we can go on and on. None of these states poses any threat to Israel. And yet, the only thing we talk about is, oh, Israel is, we have to have security for Israel. Israel, we must have cast iron guarantees of security for Israel. There's never any acceptance that anyone else has the right to security. Anyone else has the right not to be attacked by Israel. That's not, that's never up for discussion. Only Israel is allowed to have guarantees. Just we were saying earlier. Oh, recognition of Israel's right to exist, even though there's never any need for a recognition of the Palestinians to have their own state. That we don't talk about. But the issue of Israel's right to exist. So yeah, I mean, yeah, we're talking about Israel's security needs, even though there's simply no comparison with the force that is at Israel's disposal, with the force that Hamas has at its disposal, which is just minimal. That it was that thing they did on October the 7th. Okay, lasted a few hours, and they were quickly driven out. So that's the sum and substance of the threat that they posed. Trump's real plan. Well, I don't know what that is Trump's real plan, because he had to walk that plan back when it was made clear to him that you can only that you'd have to drive them out. You would have to push out 2 million people. And who exactly is going to push out 2 million people? Israel doesn't have the resources to push out 2 million people. So it would have to be done by the United States. Once I think it was explained to Trump that then we're not going to take a buyout. I mean, he could try a buyout, but I don't even know how you get a buyout, because you would have to come from the U.S. taxpayers. None of the Arab states would do a buyout. for the Palestinians. I mean, 2 million. I mean, that's a lot of money that you're going to have to shell out for a buyout. So, and the U.S. taxpayers were definitely not going to accept a buyout. I mean, to pay for a buyout, and the U.S. Would definitely, the U.S. armed forces are not going to take part in a massive ethnic cleansing of Gaza, which is what you would need to do. You'd have to start moving in. You use your U.S. forces, move in, and pick up women, children, the elderly, and push them out. And push them out where? I mean, there's, there's nowhere to go. So Trump did, after floating that whole, Gaza Lago idea in February, he did abandon that notion. He said, "No, no, well, not if it involves uh, pushing, forcing people to leave." So once, I don't know how he could have thought that there was any other way to do a Gaza Lago without forcing people to leave. But he said, "Okay, no, well, I'm certainly not going to take part in anything that involves forcing people to leave." So, um, he may have thought that this was a neat idea. You kind of create a Riviera in the Eastern Mediterranean, but it's not Trump's view anymore. He doesn't talk about that. He's realized that it was a stupid notion, and if he wants to maintain good relations with these Arab states, which I think he obviously does. He went on that big trip to the Middle East, visited Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE. If he wants to maintain that, he has to knock it off talking about all this Gaza Riviera, and I think that's why he doesn't talk about that anymore. That doesn't mean that he's still not supporting Israel, but I think that's why if one looks at this plan, the Trump plan, it's just simply the same as before. Right? There's no change here. Even if it goes ahead and it somehow they begin the implementation, we're going to be back in the same situation within a couple of years. The people who live in Gaza, they're never going to accept, um, you know, Israeli presence. They're just not going to do it. They hate Israel so much, after so many years, that the notion that they're going to just accept Israeli occupation, that they're providing security, it's not going to happen. So you can go on killing Hamas leaders. You still haven't resolved any of Israel's problems. So anyway, thank you so much. Yakobachi, good to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. Says nice perspective on the Israel deal. Thank you so much. And so yeah, well, thank you, Yakobachi. Very appreciate your generosity. And then Dennis Misty, also thank you so much for your generosity. Says, quoted in a word not fit to print, Village Voice, September the 22nd, 1982. You are afraid to tell our readers that the Israelis are capable of indiscriminately shelling an entire city. New York Times Beirut chief Thomas Friedman to his editors. It's very interesting. Friedman had been the New York Times correspondent in Lebanon during Israel's invasion, and he wrote it. I mean, he was pretty good. I mean, he was very forthright about what Israel was doing in Lebanon, and then he wrote a book about Israel's invasion. I've forgotten the name of the book, but it was very harsh about Israel. It is interesting that back in 1982, mainstream media, it was permissible in mainstream media to be harshly critical of Israel. And that, as is shown by the fact that Thomas Friedman remained on the staff of the New York Times and indeed went on to bigger things. But he never really wrote anything, never wrote anything comparable to that book, whatever it was called, From Beirut to something or other. I've forgotten the name of the book that he wrote. because after that he wrote all this crap about the world is flat or all this nonsense, and just writing these banalities and platitudes as a New York Times columnist. But if you I mean, and you can see sometimes on YouTube, you can find how the U.S. media, NBC, CBS, ABC, were covering the Israel's invasion of Lebanon. They were a little harsh. They were quite harsh, in a way that they would not be today. And that's why when Norman Podhoretz, who was editor of Commentary magazine, published by the American Jewish Committee, he wrote this long essay, titled "J'accuse." Go to J'accuse. He was attacking all the American media for being so critical of Israel, and of course, J'accuse was harkened back to Émile Zola's famous essay claiming the Dreyfus had been framed. Captain Dreyfus was framed. He was an innocent man, and he was framed because he was a Jew. He was an innocent person, and I think as I we posted on the Gaggle, I think a couple of weeks ago, as part of the Gaggle book club, Esau's Tears. And that indeed called into question, and other works have also called into question, the official narrative that Captain Dreyfus was indeed innocent. It's all been accepted. Zola, J'accuse, and so on. That Dreyfus was probably guilty, as charged, of espionage. But anyway, I mean, but just going back to Podhoretz wrote this essay, J'accuse, and the whole point was that somehow the U.S. media were judging Israel by standards that they would never use against anybody else. It was so harsh in uh, their reporting on Israel. They would never, never, never be so harsh about anyone else. Well, if they were harsh, it was because what Israel was doing was just so horrific. I mean, they were bombing Beirut. They were besieging Beirut, and the goals were so nebulous. No one could quite exactly explain what it is that Israel is doing. Why exactly they invaded Lebanon? Why are they besieging Beirut? I mean, only later it became clear what Israel was trying to achieve, which is to destroy the PLO, precisely because the PLO was moving towards acceptance of Israel and was moving towards, being ready to negotiate something with Israel. So they didn't want to do that because they want to maintain the story that PLO were just a bunch of terrorists and so on. So that's why they invaded Lebanon. And they did succeed in pushing the PLO out of Lebanon. But again, didn't really solve any of Israel's problems because that only led to the rise of Hezbollah, the Shiite of Lebanon, who previously had been allied with Israel, now really turned against Israel, and thus created Hezbollah. But the media, the U.S. media at the time, were quite critical of Israel. You can and just look at some of the news reports of that time, and they were saying they were quite upfront about what Israel was doing to Beirut, and hence the hysteria of Norman Podhoretz. So what I'm just saying that Thomas Friedman was one of the people who was very critical of what Israel was doing, and he but still managed to thrive in the New York Times, but basically wrote crap after that. That was 82. He reached the zenith of his I think of his career then in 82. I mean, he hasn't done anything interesting at all since then. Anyway, so thank you so much, Dennis Misty. And then we have R. Brown says Kirk's assassination was only 20 days ago, so it's very early to formulate a plausible alternative hypothesis. There needs to be a full investigation that could take 6 to 12 months. Well, I agree with that. I don't disagree, um, and I am absolutely ready to change my mind if a plausible alternative hypothesis is put forward, and some evidence is put forward. At the moment, you say this is where the evidence points. We have this Tyler Robinson. We have this circle that he moved in, and clearly, these people are violent, and they do kind of have these fantasies about the Charlie Kirk types. We have the messages. I know a lot of people raise questions about the messages, but who knows how people talk? They say, "Oh, he wouldn't be," they wouldn't have used this kind of language. I don't know how. Who the hell knows? What kind of language 22-year-olds use. They watch television. They're on the internet. Who knows what kind of language they use. So but their messages are there. So now, if you want to show that these messages are fake, somebody else wrote the messages that were AI generated, then give us the evidence for that. So I haven't seen it, but we'll see. I mean, there haven't been any legal proceedings yet, so he hasn't actually said anything. So we might get a better idea. But at the moment, I'd say okay, that's where the evidence is pointing. I haven't I you know I haven't seen a plausible alternative hypothesis yet. Um, and so let's see. Um, so anyway, Cynthia goes on. How can Tony Blair see his own bloodstained hands from Iraq, feel no remorse, then get involved in Israel's mass murder and destruction of Gaza? Hell truly is empty, and all the devils are here. Very good point. It's a very interesting. It's an aspect of um, Iraq. He really managed to escape, um, and went on to make an awful lot of money. Now he's a completely discredited figure in Great Britain. I mean, totally discredited. Can't really show his face in any respectable society. But as far as the international community is concerned, he's an elder statesman. It's not unlike, I mean, if George W. Bush, who is also a discredited figure, but Bush has kind of disappeared. He doesn't, he's not really seen very much. But if Bush were to say, you know what, I want to be a kind of international statesman. I want to be involved in all these kinds of international shenanigans, and wine and dine with important people, and above all, make lots and lots and lots of money. He could do it. The fact that Bush is despised, within his own country, I don't think it would damage him. And Blair, remember, he was the emissary of the quartet. Whenever the quartet, the Middle East quartet, which is Russia, the United States, the United Nations, and the EU. That was a quartet. They were going to deal with the Israel-Palestine issue. As always, that never went anywhere. But the quartet appointed Tony Blair as its emissary. So he's been, dealing with all this international negotiations and mediation and whatever for years and years now, and making a lot of money. I mean, this work is very, very remunerative. I mean, this Tony Blair Institute, no one really knows what the hell it does, other than a way to funnel money into the hands of Tony Blair and a few of his cronies. This has been quite lucrative. And Sanna Marin, the Finn chick, she's there. She's working for Tony Blair. So it's a very lucrative line of work. Now, if you say, well, his bloodstained hands in Iraq and so, yeah, yeah, but he moves in a very refined world, which doesn't hold it against him. In Britain, yeah, totally despised figure. When he was awarded a knighthood, this caused a lot of controversy. People saying, we can't give him a knighthood. What does he deserve a knighthood for? But he can talk to Trump, and he can go and talk to Mohammed bin Salman, and he go to Iraq and United Arab Emirates. He can do that because he moves in that refined esoteric world. He's welcome. It's only among the public that he's regarded as a totally despicable person. So he can move in this refined world and make lots of money along the way. George W. Bush can. At least George W. Bush has kind of hung his head in shame and has vanished from view. But if he wanted, absolutely he could move in this world and make a ton of money. I think he's just I think probably a more honorable man than Tony Blair. Anyway, Cynthia goes on, says, what's going on right now in the Middle East is hugely concerning, at least to me. It seems that the aerial refueling tankers that entered Europe from the US in the past 2 days are now on their way to the Middle East, and some of them have already arrived at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. And is the recent meeting between Hexet and hundreds of generals and admirals in any way related to this? Minus all the DEI and woke stuff discussed at the meeting, of course. I don't know. I mean, it's possible that they're moving towards this I don't know, making preparations for this transition from Israeli occupation to this international security force. So I mean that could be what they're doing. My own concerns are much more not so much the Middle East, but with Russia, because the hysteria about Russia is it seems to be just increasing exponentially day by day. It's just this the constant talk about war, this constant dread that Russia's intruding here, Russia's invading here, Russia's attacking us, hybrid attacking us, and all this. That there's going to be a point with hysteria, and it's happened in the past that you whip hysteria up so much that there's an inexorability, and then the war becomes unavoidable. So like all this talk about the Tomahawk missiles, now probably it's not doable for all sorts of reasons. Whether America doesn't have enough Tomahawk missiles to spare, Ukraine doesn't have the means to deliver it, and Trump, may think, hey, this is dangerous stuff. If Ukraine launches a Tomahawk missile, Moscow, and Ukraine can't do it without American satellite technology and so on. So it probably won't happen. But by talking like this, by whipping up this, the hysteria about, hey, why don't we give Ukraine Tomahawk missiles? Hey, that's a great idea. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's allow Ukraine to start hitting sites in Moscow. Once you go down this path, then at some point war will become inevitable. You just can't. It's like you're on an escalator and you just can't get off now. And I think that's what I'm worried about, because I don't see any off ramp. I don't see anyone getting off. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. So I'm more worried about that than I am about the Middle East, because in the Middle East, all the power is on one side. The other side just doesn't have power. The power is America and Israel. There's not really much power on the other side. I mean, it's like, Iran. We've seen, Iran. It can deliver blows against Israel, but it's not in any way comparable to Israel. But Europe, I think, is a different case. You get into a war with Russia, that's a serious business. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And R. Brown says the world is as messed up as ever. The EU operates like the Stalinist USSR, banned popular parties, imprisoned their leaders, etc. As bad as Stalin was, at least he didn't keep rerunning lost elections until he figured out how to steal them. The EU's self appointed leaders are pretty low on the totalitarian scale. They're still mostly vassal states trying to find their footing to rule in a one party model. George, you should be quite busy for as long as you like sorting out the realities of things. So thanks very much, Abraham. I agree with you that this is now what the EU has become. They're really in the business now of crushing um, any populist resistance to its rule. And what they did in Romania was a trial run. You just simply, hey, the wrong person's going to win, so let's simply cancel the election, and then we make sure that when we rerun the election, that he won't be able to run again. So now they've done this in Moldova. Each time in Moldova, it's clear Maya Sandu is going to lose. And it was clear also even on Sunday night that when Maya Sandu looked at the exit polls, she realized she's going to lose. And hence she made that announcement that she's considering annulling the election, because that was what the exit polls showed her, that she was going to lose. So right away, her response, and this obviously she got a clearance from Brussels, is to annul the election. And without question, if they hadn't been able to steal it, that election would have been annulled. And they would have rerun it and then banned more parties from running. So now you have in Germany the finding by the Bundesnachrichtendienst. No. That's the foreign intelligence. It's the Verfassungsschutzamt, the Office for the Protection of the Constitution, which is their version of the FBI or MI5. They've said, the Alternative for Deutschland Party is a threat to the Constitution. Well, if it's a threat to the Constitution, then you can just simply prevent them from running. You can just simply say, well, you can't run. That's it. You don't have to put them in prison at this stage. You can just simply say, well, you're a threat to the Constitution. You can't run. And they did that in the mayoral election in Ludwigshafen. They said, well, the AfD candidate just simply can't run. He's gone. That's it. We're taking him off the ballot. So that's going to be the model in Germany. And then you're going to have this model is going to be run everywhere else. You've got to prevent any kind of populist opposition to the rulers in the EU. I mean, we saw that again in France with Marine Le Pen. Well, as things stand, she's not going to be able to run in 2027. That's it. So that's now the EU. I mean, it's a joke. I remember, and it used to be like the Soviet Union. It was always this joke. Someone broke into the Kremlin and found next year's election results in the safe. That's you can apply that in the EU. Somebody broke into Brussels and they found the Moldova's next election result 50.02% for Maya Sandu's party. So that is exactly the way they operate now in the EU. It's really quite intolerable. And as I say, Hungary is the one country. I know it's only because of Orban. I mean, it's not because the Hungarians are particularly clever or resourceful or whatever. I mean, it's Orban himself, who's provided this opposition. And now they're saying, well, how do we get around him? Oh, well, that's a great idea. Let's just change our rules. Let's just not have any more unanimity requirement, which is what it's supposed to be. We'll have majority voting, and then we can just hope that Orban will disappear. They'll have an election next year. Orban's going to lose, and then we'll have a pliant Hungarian prime minister, this Peter Magyar, to deal with, and he'll go along with everything that we want. So that's the model. And then it may happen. I mean, it may work. They may get Orban out. Anyway, thank you, our Brown. And then Enke Meadi says, I see Israel sort of on the winning side in geostrategy and uglier real politics terms. They invest a lot in affecting the psychology of the masses, and are very successful with that. They very much challenge anything human in a human. Well, I think so. I mean, I kind of agree with you that they're winning. I mean, they do win, and I know people say, yeah, but public opinion has moved, and they're not as they've been sinking like a rock in the way even ordinary Americans see Israel, and that's without true. That undoubtedly true, yes. Okay, so how does Israel get around that? Well, it gets around it because of the Zionist billionaires. And you say, okay, well, yeah, we're losing public support, but if we have under our control TikTok, if we now have CBS, under the control of Larry Ellison or his son, and we're going to get that with CNN, and then we've got Rupert Murdoch, or now his son Lachlan Murdoch, at Fox News, then we've got the key seats of power in our hands. Yeah, we're losing support. Yeah, people don't like us and so on. But you can live with that as long as you control the commanding heights of the media. And just like when Cynthia said, well, why are we always talking about the disarmament of Hamas? We're never really talking about the disarmament of Israel. Well, that's what happens. When you control the media, you control the questions and how the questions are formulated. Yeah, the questions are always formulated. Well, we have to disarm Hamas. We have to deal with the problem of Iran and nuclear weapons. That's it. And that's what Israel is very good at doing. Yeah, sure, we're losing young people, but we've got the Zionist billionaires in our corner. Anyway, thank you. And let's see. Marty's posted another picture. Let's look at what's this picture. That's Tony Blair, and that's the Finn chick. God, I haven't seen her in a while. There's the Finn chick. Who's the and the Prime Minister of Moldova, Dorian Richin. Oh, that's the Prime Minister of Moldova. Well, that's very nice. It is the Finn chick, isn't it? Yeah, it looks like the Finn chick. Yeah, so that's it. And there's Tony Blair grinning inanely. In everything, making a ton of money. He doesn't really do very much. I mean, he stopped being prime minister in 2007. So that's now more than 18 years ago. During this time, during the past 18 years, he really hasn't done a great deal other than just rake in money. You just keep raking in money by having a ubiquitous presence. I mean, this thing that, he's going to be involved in this governance of Gaza. He's not actually ever going to show up to anything. I mean, he's going to be, living in London and going, traveling nicely, eating well, but making a lot of money by being somehow in charge of this governing authority. So it's a wonderful life, and he's still quite young, so he can make an awful lot of money in the years that are left to him. And then And then Abraham says, when a majority of the voters are a threat to the Constitution, your Constitution is illegitimate. Welcome to the self-dictatorship of Germany, France, at all. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's exactly when you have these constitutions, and they can declare, yeah, this constitution, um, the people who are voted in, or the people that the voters want, well, you can't have them. And they always have, like, is everything else is this paradigm, the paradigm that everyone uses, just like whenever we deal with any war or any conflict or anything else, well, let's bring up World War II, Hitler, Chamberlain, Churchill. That's all. That's your only, it's your go-to model to explain anything. Whatever the war, let's in Vietnam or Serbia or Libya or Hamas, it's always World War II, Chamberlain, Hitler, Churchill. So here, when they say, oh, well, we can't allow people to vote for whomever they want, they say, well, why can't you? Oh, look, people voted for Hitler. They didn't really vote for Hitler. I mean, that all of that is untrue, because you never really ever won a majority. But nonetheless, that's always the argument. Always Hitler. So as long as you've got that model, then you can justify anything you like. Oh, well, we can't possibly allow free elections. Why can't you have a free election? Well, because people might vote the wrong way. Well, yeah, but that's what democracy. Yeah, but Hitler. So they've now got this foolproof method, and until somebody can actually start challenging seriously the whole Hitler World War II analogies, which have turned out, which are absolute intellectual poison. They've been destroying the West now for decades, right? Seeing every problem under the sun through the same Hitler, Holocaust, World War II, same model. Until you do that, then this is what all these people are going to be doing. Yeah, let's just cancel this election because they're going to vote for the wrong person. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you very much, everybody who joined me. Thank you above all to those who asked really interesting, very informative, very scintillating questions. Thank you above all, of course, to those who put something into the tip jar, because that's what keeps us going. And above all, is what keeps the dogs going. And if the dogs are unhappy, and then almost always unhappy, and they're going to start checking the tip jar, then you know what happens. It's all my fault. That's it. They don't even bother negotiating. They're like Israel. They're not going to negotiate. They just blame everything on me. So thank you so much, and we will be back on Thursday. Look forward to seeing you all then. Until then, all the best. Good night. Bye bye.